Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a special edition of the Boxing Asylum NutHouse, brought to you by BoxingAsylum.com. We have a special guest today, the associate editor of Ring Magazine and the editor of RingTV.com, Doug Fischer. Doug, thank you so much for joining us today.
Guys, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here. And just to get straight to it, give our listeners a background about what brought you to being involved in boxing publications.
Boxing publications started for me as just a stringer. I've always been a fight fan. I was a big Muhammad Ali fan in the 70s. I was born in 1970. I'm 42. I'll be 43 this May. When I was just starting to become aware of the sports and entertainment world, Muhammad Ali was the absolute king. He was in his second reign as heavyweight champion of the world, and he was on network television. And, obviously he was larger than life. So I wasn't a boxing fan. I wasn't really a sports fan, but I was a big Muhammad Ali fan. And I think, Ali was sort of the entree into boxing. And about the time that I became aware of Muhammad Ali was about the time of the 1976 Olympics, which had just tremendous American talent, primarily Sugar Ray Leonard. And when Muhammad Ali was clearly on the decline, and when he was, retired, Sugar Ray Leonard sort of filled that spot as like my hero. You know what I mean? The living legend out there that I followed, and through Leonard, I gained an appreciation of the sport of boxing itself. With Muhammad Ali, it was just about Ali. With Sugar Ray Leonard, I suddenly became aware of weight classes. There was, weight classes that were lighter than heavyweight, and from the guys that Leonard fought, like Roberto Duran and Thomas Hearns, I learned about other tremendous fighters, active fighters at that time. And, at some point, I became one of these guys that, had to have as much information about the sport as possible. And I was like that in the early 80s. With the retirement of Leonard, I kind of fell out of it, but I came back. I got back into the sport. Like my junior or senior year in high school, when Leonard came out of retirement to fight Marvin Hagler. And at this time, Mike Tyson was fighting like every other month, it seemed like, on HBO. And he was, of course, very exciting. And I would say I've been just a hardcore fight fan since the late 80s. So when I went to college and I got my degree in communications and journalism, and I went on to get a master's degree from Columbia's graduate program in journalism, I relocated to the West Coast, where I knew there was sort of a thriving boxing scene. I knew there were boxing gyms out here. I'd read about the stories. I'd watched forum boxing shows on what was then called the Prime Network. It's basically now Fox Sports Net, but where I lived in the Midwest, 2 o'clock in the morning, they would show the broadcast from the Great Western Forum, and I was watching guys like Chiquita Gonzalez and the late Gennaro Hernandez fight. And so I had a fascination with not just boxing, but like Mexican boxing, Mexican-American boxing, and the whole West Coast, sort of Southern California boxing scene. So when I moved here in late 93, I couldn't wait to join a gym. I couldn't wait to start going to club shows in the Valley, out in the desert, and of course in the Inglewood area where I live now. And to see shows at the Great Western Forum, and I saw great shows with guys like Mark Too Sharp Johnson when he was coming up, and Juan Manuel Marquez when he was coming up, Marco Antonio Barrera as well. I mean, like before these guys were champions, I was paying money for a ticket to watch these guys fight right here in Inglewood, which was just awesome. And I was working for a newspaper at the time, and they had a sports section. This is a weekly paper, kind of based in South Central Los Angeles. And the sports editor hated boxing. He covered everything but boxing. And I thought that was insane because there was so much boxing happening in the greater LA area at that time. So I just asked him, hey, man, if you don't want to cover these, fights at the Forum or, the Grand Olympic Auditorium, which reopened in the mid-'90s, I said, I'll do it. I wanted to do it just to get in free. So he was like, oh, you want to go cover this boxing? Go for it. So that's kind of how I got started. And I also was a stringer for some other newspapers, like the competing newspaper to my newspaper, which was the Sentinel, kind of like the largest African-American newspaper, in the Southern California area. So I did some stringing for them. And I did this from I'd say, 94 through 96. And in 97, I kind of discovered the internet. I mean, I knew the internet was around, but I didn't even have an email account. It wasn't something that really interested me, but a dude that trained at the same gym that I trained at, the LA Boxing Club, a guy named Gary Randall, he was way into the internet. He was a graphic designer. He was a webmaster, and he was wanting to start up some kind of like a boxing website, basically. But he didn't really know how to do it. He didn't have any sort of editorial background. And we were good friends, and we sparred and stuff like that. And we just started working together. And we came up with House of Boxing. Actually, Gary came up with the name House of Boxing in 97. And it really just it kind of snowballed from 97. I mean, by early 99, there were companies reaching out to us saying, hey, we're interested in buying this online property and paying you guys a salary. And we kind of just took in offers the entire year of 99. And we finally settled with this East Coast operation that we were introduced to by Shannon Briggs, who was training with the late great Emmanuel Stewart at the time in the Big Bear area. Manny Stewart was trying to start like a Kronk Gym West, and he had a gym briefly in Big Bear, and we went up there and we interviewed Shannon and shot video of Shannon Briggs training for Francois Botha, who ironically was also training in Big Bear at the time. So we got to know Shannon, and Shannon's manager owned a company, or was like the CEO of some publicly traded company. I forget the name of it, as a matter of fact. Worldwide Entertainment and Sports. And Mark had a lot of money. Mark had other people's money. He was a good fundraiser and a good guy at starting up these sort of publicly traded entities. And Mark made us a great offer, and he bought House of Boxing. And just like that, in late 99, early 2000, what had been a hobby became a full-time job for me. And boxing writing on the internet has been a full-time job for me, I think, since February of 2000.
It's great when you can take something that was your passion and find a way to make money from it. So I mean, congratulations on that one, Doug. That's the good stuff. Now, let me ask you this. You mentioned, growing up and not even the weight classes and all that. And, it's really a mystery, when you first get into it, just how much is going on. But since that time, what have you noticed as far as, going on maybe sanctioning bodies, titles and stuff like that over the last 25 years? What do you think has made the sport has made it more complicated compared to days past?
Well, I don't think the sanctioning organizations help in that regard in making things simple for the general public. I don't think the sanctioning bodies bother hardcore fans. I think if you're really hardcore, I mean you love them, or I mean no one really loves them, but if you're a hardcore fan, you just understand that they're sort of part of the business of boxing, and they are part of the sport. And they do serve as a certain benchmark for fighters. And if you're a hardcore fan, just because a guy has the IBF title in a certain weight class, that doesn't mean that he is the champion of that division. But that is confusing to the layperson. That is confusing to a casual fan, who'll watch TV and the commentators are naming 3 or 4 world champions at the same weight class. That can be complicated, but I don't think that's what makes boxing more complicated these days. I mean, I think the fact that it's not on network television all the time. I mean, I think that's the main thing, is that it's one step further away from public consumption. And the way things are in our society and most societies is, if you're out of sight, you're out of mind, and it doesn't matter how good the product is. If it's not there for public consumption, and people can't consume it and take it in and get hooked on it, they're not going to get hooked on it. And, I really wonder if I would have become a boxing fan if Muhammad Ali was fighting on pay-per-view, if Muhammad Ali wasn't fighting on ABC Sports. You know what I mean? I mean, I watched, heavyweight championship fights, Saturday afternoon and sometimes during prime time during the week. And so it was hard for me to miss, or anybody my age, to miss Muhammad Ali, because he was out there, he was loud, he was proud, and he was a natural born entertainer. But he was also fighting a lot. He fought all the time. And, if his fights weren't televised live on network television, then they were carried on network TV on a tape delay basis. And that changed. That ceased to be by the mid 1980s. And by the 1990s, all of really, elite world-class boxing was on, in America, was on subscription cable networks, Showtime and HBO, which, those networks, those premium cable networks were able to pay the managers, promoters, and boxers a lot more money than the networks were willing to shell out. But in accepting more money, basically the American boxing industry moved to a much smaller universe. And I mean, I think that's the main thing that really prevents the casual fan from becoming a diehard boxing nut like I was. And, even in the late 80s and early 90s, when this transition was happening, boxing was still very much available. I mean, I remember when I was in college, NBC had a Saturday afternoon program, I think just called The Greatest Fights. And they had a panel that included Marv Albert, and he was sort of the moderator, and it had Ferdy Pacheco and the late Archie Moore and the late Angelo Dundee, and other sort of boxing luminaries would watch a great fight like a Joe Louis fight, or they would watch the Thrilla in Manila, or Ali Foreman's Rumble in the Jungle. And in between rounds, they would sort of, analyze what we were watching. But this was a program that was on network television that was reintroducing great fights to a new generation. And if you happen to miss the live broadcast on NBC, there were VHS tapes. This is back in the days of VCRs and. But the VHS tapes were available, of course, in video stores. But also at your local grocery market, and so there used to be these big bins of videotapes of everything from the Three Stooges to Mighty Mouse cartoons, to old sitcoms and old movies. But mixed in there would be these tapes of boxing. And if I happened to miss a fight, like I wasn't able to watch the rematch between Sugar Ray Leonard and Thomas Hearns live. And I even met, that fight was like a closed circuit fight, but it was, I think it was shown on HBO, and then it was shown a couple of weeks later on one of the networks, maybe CBS. I think it was CBS because Tim Ryan and Gil Clancy did the broadcast, with the network commentators. But I was able to get a VHS tape that had both fights. It had the 1981 Classic and the 1989 rematch on it. And I was also able to collect the tapes of NBC's The Great Fights, or the Greatest Fights series, which was, the Thrill in Manila, the Rumble in the Jungle. There was a great documentary on all the tremendous heavyweight champions from the 70s, like Ali, Frazier, Ken Norton, Larry Holmes and George Foreman, called Champions Forever. And that was available. And so if you were just a casual fan, you could pick up this videotape for just a couple of bucks and take it home and watch it. And if you had been in love with boxing but had fallen out of love with it, you fell in love with it again. And if you didn't know anything about boxing, you got bit by the bug. You were like, this is so awesome, this stuff. Where else can I watch it? And you would find out about, Friday night fights and USA Network's Tuesday night fights. You would go out and you would buy Ring Magazine or KO Magazine or Boxing Illustrated, and you would immerse yourself into the sport. And once you did that, you're pretty much diehard for life. I mean, that's how I was. I mean, I just immersed myself in the sport, or re-immersed myself in the sport in the late 80s, early 90s as a college student, and I haven't looked back. And I think, when it comes to people not understanding the sport or viewing the sport as confusing and all that, it's because they haven't really been able to immerse themselves in it, and that's because it's really kind of in its own universe. It's just in this, in the United States, it's just, boxing at its highest level is pay-per-view, HBO, and Showtime, and it's just a number of specialty websites. It's not covered extensively by the mainstream media. It's not in newspapers. It's not on the nightly sports news broadcast. Which and it used to be. So I mean, I think that's the number one factor when it comes to the general public being confused by the sport, not being able to kind of jibe with it, kind of get in sync with it. And the boxing industry doesn't make that easy with all of the politics and all of the bad blood and all of the just the business of boxing getting in the way and superseding the sport of boxing.
Oh, absolutely, and that's the problem. You show a fight to a couple people, are like, well, they weigh the same. Why can't these guys get together and fight? And then you have to explain it, different promotional banners, and it just.
And by that time, they're already tuning out.
Absolutely, they're like, why can't it just happen? Because the fight. I mean, they used to do the best they could to make the fights that people wanted. I mean,
that's true. And the thing is, the good fights are still happening.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you're just a general sports fan, and you watched, the Brandon Rios Mike Alvarado rematch. You're gonna love it. You're gonna watch all 12 rounds. You're gonna wait around for the decision. It's not like you were gonna watch 1 or 2 rounds or 1.5 rounds and then be like, okay, I'm gonna click away. If you're a sports fan at all and you relish competition and you relish action and drama and excitement, boxing will deliver. It's just that it's not being delivered to the general public, and the best fights are not being delivered on a consistent enough basis to attract the casual fan, make him a hardcore fan, and keep him a hardcore fan. Because a lot of times the sport will attract the casual fan and make him a hardcore fan, and then frustrate the hell out of him until he's got to leave. The sport will pull fans in, and then it'll push them away with the politics, because fans are going to want to see certain matchups, and then there's all these excuses why the fight is not going to happen. Well, he's with this promoter, and he's with that promoter, and he's on this network, and he's on that network, or he wants more money, and he wants more money, or there's all these lines in the sand that are drawn. And the media, I mean, the people who kind of convey boxing to the general public, or who cover the sport, we get all caught up in that stuff. We get caught up in the politics. We get caught up in the business. And we're no longer writing about a sport, so I mean, how are sports fans going to be interested? Well, or stay interested?
That's absolutely it. The problem with sports when it's when you're talking about individuals that have individual contracts, and there's choices being made, is that things don't happen. In the NFL, the 2 best teams of the year theoretically are going to end up playing each other in the end.
And set up that way.
Yeah,
right, exactly.
And we don't have that. It's unfortunately. I mean, when you have your big mailbox and you answer all the questions, and I can only imagine all the questions that you get in there, but do you get tired of just running across questions and you're like, there's no point in answering this. The fight cannot happen.
Yeah, I do. I get, at some point I got tired of, Mayweather Pacquiao. I got tired of, even if it was a nice rational email about it, it was just, I felt like I was wasting my time explaining why it's not going to happen or may not happen. And I was one of those cynical folks that didn't think it was going to happen. I kind of figured if it didn't happen in 2010, it probably wasn't going to happen. I mean, I kind of held out hope, but I can't help but be cynical with certain scenarios in the sport. But yeah, I get tired of it, and I don't want to analyze a fight that's probably not going to happen. You know what I mean? I don't mind, like, for fun, going over a mythical matchup, like, hey, what would have happened if Aaron Pryor would have fought Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., Julio Cesar Chavez Sr., both in their prime at 140 pounds. That's fun and all, but I mean, there's an added note of frustration when you're kind of doing a mythical matchup scenario for a fight involving guys who are active right now and are on top of the sport, and the fight's not going to happen. You know what I mean? It's like, why get into an argument about that? It's just, it's frustrating. So yeah, I do get sick of it. And I think at some point, maybe a year and a half ago or whatever, I just said, hey, folks, maybe it was just last year. I said, hey, if the fight isn't made this year, I don't want to talk about it anymore. If it can't be made in 2.5, 3 years, it just ain't gonna happen, and I'm not gonna even print emails about it. And I think I stuck to that.
I can't blame you
I
for
think
it.
Juan Manuel Marquez kind of helped me out by cold cocking Pacquiao, but
Absolutely.
yeah, it's kind of like, all right, the issue is officially dead now. Let's move on.
Absolutely. Kurt, did you have something you were trying to say there?
Yeah, Doug, you mentioned, when you got into the sport, Muhammad Ali was king, and then, later on, Mike Tyson came along. Over the past, I'd say the decade, the heavyweight division has slowly, gone to Europe, especially with the Klitschko brothers. I mean, what has that had impact? Has that had on American boxing, not having, a big heavyweight star?
Yes, it's had a negative impact, which I think is unfair in a way to the Klitschkos, because I think the Klitschkos are about as honorable and as admirable a pair of professional athletes as you can find in any sport.
Fully
They're
agree.
very rare for boxing, but if they were tennis players, or if they were soccer players, or they were basketball players, I mean, they have impressive credentials, just as human beings. You know what I'm saying? They're good businessmen. They learned their craft. They're always in tip-top condition. And they've put up some, Hall of Fame worthy stats as far as boxing is concerned. But the fact of the matter is, they're not American, and they're not exactly American friendly. They don't have the certain swagger that, Muhammad Ali sort of popularized, in the late '60s and throughout the '70s. And they don't fight in America often. I actually think the Klitschkos, I don't think they would ever be completely embraced by the American public, but I think had all of their fights that have taken place in Europe, primarily Germany, been fought here in the States, they would have a considerable fan base, and they would definitely have a higher level of respect than they have now with hardcore American fans, and with the U.S. boxing media, because they would be more accessible. They're good interviews. They are thoughtful interviews. And they are something to see live. I've seen both guys fight a number of times each live, and I've had the opportunity to watch them train, which a lot of American boxing writers have not had the opportunity to see. There was a time where they were both living in the Los Angeles area, and they trained at a now closed gym called the La Brea Boxing Academy. It was on La Brea Avenue and Wilshire Boulevard, I believe. And it was amazing watching them, because they're students of the game. I mean, they had certain guys that they had hired as sparring partners that they didn't even hit, but they wanted to have in their camps, and they wanted to get in the ring with them just to absorb the knowledge from these guys who were well past their prime and no longer even fighting as professionals. One guy in particular that comes to mind is Tony Tubbs, a very slick, savvy African-American fighter out of Cincinnati, Ohio, who, held a version of the heavyweight title, I don't know, sometime in the, mid-'80s. But he's a real crafty veteran, knows all the tricks, and they had him in that camp just to absorb from him. And they did. And the old-timers who were at the gym, these are guys who were dead now, and these were dudes in their 70s and 80s at the time. One guy is an all-time great, in my opinion, boxing trainer named Amilcar Brusa, and he developed and basically made the late, great Carlos Monzon, the great middleweight champion. And I think he trained, 13 or 14 major world title holders during his career. And he was in that gym, and a local old-timer named Don Familton was in that gym. And the Klitschko brothers would do their workout, and then they would just sit for an hour or two and just watch these old-timers try to impart their wisdom in their own young trainers. And you would just watch them, and then they would, speak to each other in German, Russian, Ukrainian, whatever language they were speaking. It wasn't English. And they would talk to each other, and they were just taking notes. So those guys are real students of the game, total gentlemen. They would come into the gym, shake everybody's hand, no matter who, even people who had been jerks to them in the past. And I could, count myself as one of those jerks. They're gentlemen, you know what I mean? And they're smart guys, and they're good people. And I think if they had just been in the public eye more, the American public eye, and doing a lot of interviews and fighting at Madison Square Garden and at Staples Center and the Thomas and Mack Center in Las Vegas and the MGM Grand, and maybe even going to some other great venues. I don't know, like maybe the Auburn Hills Palace in Auburn Hills, Michigan, or the Cobo Hall, the Joe Louis Hall in Detroit. They would get ink, they would get coverage. People would be curious and would watch them, and maybe they wouldn't be blown away by their boxing style. I think they would be impressed by the end result, because the Klitschko's usually do stop their man. But just listening to their post-fight interview, I think there would be a segment of America that would, at the very least, come to appreciate them, and that hasn't happened. And I can't blame the Klitschko's for it, because the bottom line is they are huge superstars in Germany and other parts of Europe, and it just makes business sense. The German networks they have to deal with shell out more money than HBO and Showtime are willing to shell out to broadcast their fights live, and just the live gates that their fights do. I mean, they don't just do arena fights; they do stadium fights. So I can't fault them for fighting in Germany or Poland or wherever. You know what I mean? They're doing great business in Europe, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm not going to lie. The fact that they are sort of the undisputed two-headed heavyweight champion of the world, and they're not American, it does sort of wane American interest in boxing.
Well, and the sad thing is that for some reason, a lot of times in America, we miss the forest for the trees, and we always find something to complain about instead of finding something to learn about. If we were to take the way that K2 and Sauerland run their boxing events,
oh my gosh,
it would be amazing. They're pure entertainment.
K2, Sauerland, just in the presentation of those events, yes, absolutely, they're bringing world class entertainment value to the live event. They're bringing production value. In America, you see with pro wrestling, and you see with the UFC, and you see just with general entertainment with concerts, right? Some huge band or whatever. They bring that type of production value to the live event. But beyond that, the way they do business, they're so organized, and they don't let their egos get out of control. In that same vein, Taken Boxing Promotions in Japan, run by the venerable Mr. Honda. I mean, they run a tight ship, and they give their fans what their fans want. They don't beef with other promoters, you know what I mean? And if they do beef with other promoters, they don't make that public. They kind of keep their own egos in check, and they're gentlemen, and they conduct their business as gentlemen, and they conduct their personal relationships as gentlemen. And we definitely need a little bit more of that here in America, where, for the most part, American promoters hustle their asses off. They generally, at the end of the day, they get the job done for the most part, not all the time, certainly not enough to satisfy hardcore fans. But I will say this, American promoters sometimes say a little bit too much publicly. Not just American promoters, sometimes, the network executives with HBO and Showtime, I think, say a little bit too much, and allow their egos to be pulled into the business of boxing and let their opinions be known. And sometimes they make negative opinions be known when it didn't need to be known, didn't need to be out there. I think that happens too much in America. And I tell you what, it does not happen very often in Germany or Japan. It happens in the UK. It happens in the UK. But not as much as it does here in the United States. There's no doubt about that. And I don't like the negative vibes that just are kind of part of just being a modern boxing fan. It just seems like everyone is miserable all the time, and we complain a lot, and we ask for fights, and then on those occasions when the promoters or the fighters themselves just go against the promoters and managers and say, hey, this is the fight the public wants, let's give it to them, and the fight gets done, I still hear people complain. Like as soon as Nonito Donaire stepped up to 122 pounds, I'm hearing from hardcore fans, well, is he going to fight Guillermo Rigondeaux? I bet you he's afraid of Guillermo Rigondeaux. He steps up. He wins a title at 122 pounds at his debut at junior featherweight. His next fight, he unifies titles, and everyone's saying, hey, what about Guillermo Rigondeaux? Now, mind you, he's only been a junior featherweight for about 6 or 7 months, but it's all about, don't avoid the Cuban lefty. This guy can beat you. You're afraid of him if you don't immediately call him out after every fight. He fights Toshiaki Nishioka, the consensus choice for the number 122-pounder. He dominates the dude, stops him. I think he's the first guy ever to knock Nishioka out. And then he has just like a stay busy fight, a money making fight against Jorge Arce, totally faded. We knew he would whip Arce's butt. And people are they're upset. They're mad. They're saying, no, this guy doesn't want to fight Rigondeaux. Okay, well, the Rigondeaux fight is made, and people still seemed what's that, sweetie? That's my 5-year-old, soon to be 5-year-old. Okay, sweetie. When I'm off the phone, you tell me about it. She wrote something down on paper. Man, her handwriting is better than mine.
Yeah, I saw my nieces the other day.
Okay, the 8-year-old has better handwriting than me. All right, sweetie, I'll let you know when I'm off the phone. But she needed to interrupt me. I'm a long-winded dude. But I mean, my point is, fans will ask for certain fights, and Alvarez-Trout, Saul Alvarez versus Austin Trout. That's another example. It's a fight where people say, okay, these guys are among the top 3, 4, or 5 in their division. I want to see that fight, and you have a certain segment of the boxing fan population saying Canelo's afraid, Filipino Flash is afraid. Okay, well, the fight is made. How about giving them some credit and being happy that we've got some true hardcore fight fan matchups made? How about being satisfied about that? Just for once, just like take a look at our boxing schedule and look at the fights that we've had just in the month of March. Look at Bradley Provodnikov, unexpected gym, but we have to admire the effort that those fighters put out and the great fight that they provided us. Rios and Alvarado, no surprise there. They do it again. They wage a fight of the year candidate. And you look at the fights that are on tap in the months of April, May, and June, and you can literally pull out 8 to 10 great matchups. I mean, hardcore fight fan matchups.
Merez and PDL, that's going to be a great fight.
Exactly. I mean, Maidana versus Josecito Lopez. Lucas Matthysse, Lamont Peterson. You know what I'm saying? These are good. These are quality fights, and these are fights where it's not easy to pick a winner. And these are also fights where I think we're all pretty sure, as guys who know boxing, stylistically, we're pretty sure that it's going to give us an entertaining contest. I mean, that's what we want. We want entertainment. We want drama. We want competition at its highest level between the best fighters. So when boxing delivers, I mean, it would be nice to hear a little bit more just from the fight fans, especially, Twitter generation, like, hey, I'm looking forward to these fights. But it seems like folks still look for stuff to bitch and moan about, and that does get a little old.
Oh, yeah. We're always complaining about something. But you mentioned a couple of these fighters here, and I got a list of a few fighters. And I just wanted to ask you, these guys are hyped up for various reasons. And I'd just like to know your opinion on these guys as far as, where you think their ceiling is, if you think those hyping them are in the ballpark of what their actual abilities are.
Okay.
First one I got for you, Gennady Golovkin.
I think his hype right now in certain circles, and I'm one of the guys driving the bandwagon, I admit I've written stuff that is definitely hyping this guy up as, special. Okay. I'll be the first to admit he hasn't defeated the kind of opposition that would normally accompany that kind of buzz. But I will add to that, he has the type of style, ring style, and his fights end in a result that are going to attract attention regardless of the level of his competition. I mean, let's face it, there was a buzz on Mike Tyson, a strong buzz on Mike Tyson among regular sports fans before the guy won his first major title. and he wasn't fighting Murderer's Row, but he was fighting often, which is a goal that Golovkin has for this year, and he was whacking guys out of there, highlight reel caliber KO performances, and that's what Golovkin delivers. So he's going to get attention if you put him on HBO. He's going to get some rave reviews, and of course you're going to have the contrarian saying, "Nah, he's plotting, he's methodical, he gets hit. I'm not impressed," or whatever. From what I've seen, from what I know about him, about his amateur background, I've had the opportunity to watch him train more than a few times, seeing his work ethic, having the opportunity to talk to him at length and get a gauge of his intelligence, which is high. I think he's going to live up to the hype and maybe even surpass it.
Wow.
Maybe even beat those guys that people say, well, stylistically, yeah, he will wreck shop at 160. But when he steps up to 168 pounds, the guys are bigger than him and better athletes and more versatile boxers like an Andre Ward or an Andre Dirrell or whoever, Lucien Boot, then he'll be exposed. Here, I'm saying I don't think he gets exposed. I'm not saying he wipes his ass with Andre Ward or even Dirrell. I'm not saying that. But I am saying he will not embarrass himself in against those guys, in against that caliber of opposition. It remains to be seen, but that's what I think. So I'm telling you, I think Gennady Golovkin is the truth. But at the same time, I'm happy to admit that he hasn't beaten the top middleweights. He's considered a top middleweight, but he has not defeated the top middleweights. I mean, the best middleweight he's defeated was that guy Greg Proksa, who was a lower top 10, right? Would you guys agree? Kind of like
he was a poor man, Sergio Martinez.
Right? Yeah, right. And he had been shocked by he lost a decision to a journeyman,
Kerry Hope,
but he had Kerry Hope, right? So I mean, obviously that guy was not a world beater, but definitely a solid fighter, definitely a tough customer that you normally don't see somebody just dominate him the way Golovkin did.
Yeah, for me, Golovkin just needs his chance. It's kind of like the late Vernon Forrest. They could only hold him off so long until someone had to fight him.
Absolutely.
And then the first person to drop Mosley. Pacquiao obviously dropping him later in his career, but that uppercut, Jesus. Here's another guy. This is someone I'm really huge on. Lucas Matthysse.
Yeah, I think he's real. I don't think there's any hype involved with Lucas Matthysse. I think he's earned his position in the rankings, and I think he's earned the position he holds with hardcore fans. He was an unknown when he fought Zab Judah, and he kind of served notice in the Judah fight, which I don't think was a robbery. I thought it could have gone either way. They happened to be in New Jersey, and the benefit of the doubt went with Zab, but I don't think that was a bad decision. I thought it was a decision that could have gone either way by a point. I had Matthysse up by a point. I thought they both won 6 rounds. Matthysse had a knockdown, so he deserved that fight. I definitely think he deserved the decision in that 10-round bout with Devon Alexander. I thought that was a hometown decision. I thought that was a bad decision. But even though he didn't get the official result, he didn't get the official win, again, I think he served notice that he can compete and that he has the ability, the technical expertise, as well as the raw talent to compete with sort of elite-level American boxers who are also high-level athletes as well. And really, since the Alexander fight, he's on a nice run. The beatdown of Olusegun, who was 30-0 at the time.
Very underrated win. Underrated.
Yeah, absolutely. That to me, that was an impressive win. The Humberto Soto fight, I think he kind of corrects some of the flaws that he's had by starting faster. I think that was the flaw. That was the knock against him, against Judah and Alexander's, that he kind of stayed in one speed and that he had a slow start, and he started faster against Soto. Obviously started pretty fast against Mike Dallas. So, I think I don't think there's any sort of hype with Lucas Matthysse. Now that doesn't mean I think that he can beat every 140-pounder out there. That just means I think he can compete with every 140-pounder out there. And I would probably favor him to beat most of them. Not all of them, but most of them. I would.
And I have a question for you just a little bit down the road and involving that little tournament that Golden Boys got going on at 140. But staying on this right now, let me throw this name to you. Leo Santa Cruz.
Leo's somebody I've been familiar with since he was a kid. Since before I even knew he was I knew his older brother, Jose Armando Santa Cruz, and Jose Armando's brother, Robert, when they were still amateurs. And I remember seeing Leo before he even started boxing. I remember seeing him at the gym. So literally, this is the kid who has grown up in a boxing family, grown up in the gym. And I didn't know he was as good of an amateur as he was. I mean, he beat like the best bantamweights, guys like Rico Ramos and what's the other guy from Orange County? Ronnie Rios, all the good local fighters, Charles Huerta, who were in his weight class, Chris Martin, that's another dude. All those guys, he beat all those guys. I had no idea he was kind of like the man at 118 pounds in the amateurs, bantamweight amateur king of the Southern California area. I didn't even realize that. But I've always liked him as a professional. I was happy when he finally kind of found a solid promotional situation, because he was with Top Rank briefly, and then he was unsigned, and then he was with that upstart TKO Boxing, which folded, and so he couldn't get any kind of momentum. He couldn't get any sort of regular television exposure, and I think Golden Boy, and this is really because of matchmaker Eric Gomez, who had watched him spar a few times and kind of fell in love with the kid. Gomez kind of got behind him, and Gomez sort of threw him to the wolves, kind of tossed him down a well a couple of times with some tough guys. That Jamoye guy that he fought in Mexico, that was a tough customer. And then the former title holder from Puerto Rico, what's the guy's name? Is it Jose Lopez?
Could be.
I think so. Clarita Jose Lopez. Yeah, real tough customer, man, from Puerto Rico. It was like a Telefutura fight. But Gomez tossed him in the well, and Leo Santa Cruz just kept crawling out of the well, which he proved himself. And he did something very special last year, which is just fight as often as possible. And I wish more young fighters would do that. But whatever buzz he has, I think he earned with last year, with winning the title, but also being a fighting champion, being a busy, active world title holder.
Yeah, absolutely. Just going out and getting it. I mean, that's.
I'll say this about his style: he has limits. He can be outboxed. I mean, you put him in there with the dude who is got really good lateral movement, who can punch on the fly, who's not going to stay in the pocket too long with him. He can be outboxed. He can be defeated. It's not going to be easy. It's kind of like, putting in somebody who sticks and moves against Brandon Rios. Yeah, you can neutralize him to a degree, but you're still going to take punishment. Mike Alvarado fought a brilliant fight. I mean, he really did. He just fought a brilliant, versatile fight, mixed in everything, did a little bit of everything. And still, even though he clearly won that fight, it was a close fight, even though he clearly won the fight, by the end of 12 rounds, it looked like a pile of bricks had fallen on Mike Alvarado's head.
And he's tore up, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the same thing with Leo Santa Cruz. I think there's going to be guys who will be able to outbox him, particularly at junior featherweight where there's deeper talent. But let's say Santa Cruz fought somebody like Chimito Moreno, Anselmo Moreno.
Stylistic nightmare.
Moreno beats him, but I tell you what. I don't know if Moreno's going to look like he was hit by a ton of bricks in the face, but he's going to feel like people were throwing bricks at his body.
Oh yeah,
he's going to spin in the fight. I'll say that much. It'll be a tough, physical, grueling fight for him. And that's the kind of guy that Santa Cruz is. And I also think he's the kind of guy that he can suffer a loss here and there, and I think fans will still want to see him fight.
Now, here's a guy just 4 pounds north where Santa Cruz is heading. What about Gary Russell Jr.? I mean, the fastest hands I can recall seeing
Yeah. Oh no, and trust me, I think his first television appearances, his first fights in front of a national audience in the U.S., they were fight night club shows. So I was doing the call, and I was, it's a real small venue, and I'm sitting right on the ring apron, right by the one of the judges, and watching him live. It's just like, how is anyone going to handle this dude? I'm sitting ringside, and I'm looking them. I have a side view of both fighters, and I'm missing some of his punches. So I can't imagine what it must be like to be squared up with this guy, facing him, and knowing what it's like to be in the ring with somebody who's fast. You don't see the punches, you just feel them. So it must be just bewildering to have to fight him. And saying that, and sort of acknowledging that talent that he has, I think it's really sad that he has not been able to really get any career momentum going. I think towards the end of 2011, maybe he was the consensus choice for Prospect of the Year. And what happened in 2012? Consensus
choice for Prospect of the Year.
And I don't want to pick on Gary Russell, but I mean, there's something has happened with the amateur program, or with the way fighters who are the highly touted U.S. amateur standouts. They turn pro, and maybe they're used to kind of being prima donnas, or maybe they're making too much money, or their managerial arrangement or their promotional arrangement is a little bit too accommodating, and they're not pushed hard enough, or if there's some kind of character lacking. But you look at all of the top talents that came out of that 2008 U.S. Olympic squad. None of them are contenders. I mean, there's already been another Olympics. We knew the new Olympic squad is 2012. Usually by this time, the stars, your best athletes and best boxers, most skilled boxers from the previous Olympics, have at least established themselves as contenders, if not major title holders. But you don't see that with Gary Russell Jr. or with Demetrius Andrade, who I think was also a world amateur champion. This guy, this heavyweight, Deontay Wilder, is not super skilled, and he started boxing late like a lot of American heavyweights. But there's no denying his athletic prowess. I mean, he is a physical specimen. I mean, the dude is a tremendous athlete. You would think by now he would have fought like at least a fringe contender. That hasn't happened. He's still a prospect. I just gotta wonder what's up.
I think it goes back even further.
From the 2008 Olympics too. I think so. What the hell? What the hell happened to Sean Estrada? What the heck happened with Molina? This guy Javier Molina. He's a terrific boxer, terrific talent. And I don't know what happened to these guys, but there's something's missing. I mean,
I think you're right.
They all made the 2008 Olympic team, and none of them have gone beyond being prospects yet. 4 years later.
Well, even going back further, I mean, you have Andre Ward, where there's something in him, whether it's his faith or just the way he was raised or something, but where he's just a tremendously grounded person. Where on the other hand, Andre Dirrell, I am so tired of even hearing his name, dropping out of fights, running his mouth.
Yep.
It's one of those things, and he has so much talent. It's just one of those things where
more talent than Ward. I think Dirrell is more athletically gifted. I think Dirrell is more athletically gifted than Andre Ward. However, if they ever fought, I would pick Andre Ward in a minute, because guess what? Character counts in this business.
He'd break down Dirrell mentally. He would break him down mentally.
Absolutely. There's no doubt about that.
So,
now, I don't know what's happened with certain U.S. amateur stars.
It's frustrating. And that fight against Froch, in the world of boxing forums, the most common that we have, because, there is no language barrier, is the Brits and the Americans. And having to defend his running against Froch, it was...
Yeah.
But anyhow.
I thought he won, but I didn't defend... I didn't make us think about it. I thought Dirrell did enough to outpoint Froch, but you couldn't complain about the outcome because of the manner in which Dirrell fought or didn't fight.
Yeah, and that was the fight where I actually grew to respect Carl Froch more, because it became clear after the fight he just expects people to come in there and try to trade some punches with him. He wants a damn fight, and that's what he's all about. So, moving on from there, let me ask you, bringing up that the elephant in the room of boxing, the PEDs.
Hmm.
Now, what damage to the sport do you think PEDs have really done at this point in time? Considering that there's so much behind the scenes that the average boxing fan can't comprehend. I mean, what are we missing possibly that is going to be incredibly detrimental to the sport going down the road?
Well, I don't know what we're missing. This isn't my area of expertise, but I can assume that we're missing a lot. And I think what's detrimental, performance enhancing drugs is detrimental to boxing, is that we've come to a point where we assume a lot of our elite fighters are using performance enhancing drugs, whether there's proof or not, or whether there was a past history or not. And that's a big problem. And that sucks. I mean, I didn't like it at all when, Juan Manuel Marquez scored like the most significant victory of his, Hall of Fame career against his arch rival, his nemesis, basically, Manny Pacquiao. And you got people, accusing him of things, But I mean, that's pro sports. That's modern pro sports. It's happened enough to where a fighter actually has to worry about how his body looks. A boxer has to worry about being too muscular or showing too much power or showing too much physical strength or showing resilience, things that boxers are supposed to show. You know what I mean? They have to worry about being suspect, and it's kind of like you're guilty until proven innocent. You know what I mean? It's like if a boxer in this era is not doing what Nonito Donaire is doing, which is undergoing random drug testing year round and making the results of that drug testing public, there's always going to be a little bit of skepticism or some suspicions out there about a fighter who operates consistently on the elite level
Do you
or goes beyond the limits of human endurance.
Absolutely. But just it's getting into the we're not scientists, so we don't know for sure. But do you have any fear or doubts or just the thought sticking in the back of your head that it is possible that the science of PEDs is just moving at a slightly quicker rate than the
Oh yeah.
science of testing?
Oh, I think so. I mean, it's that way in other sports. It's been that way in other sports for decades. It's been that way in track and field and cycling, for decades, Boxing is slow to catch on because the culture of boxing for so many decades was to lock the rest of the world out. The gym was a place that was just for the fighters, and they had the old ways, which was, very old school. You eat red meat, you abstain from sex, you don't lift weights, all this stuff. You know what I mean? You run in military boots, long, slow distance. You don't do sprints. And gradually, modern training methods have worked their way in to the sport to where it's now modern practice. Boxers have better diets now than they had in previous decades. They're mixing different types of, training into their conditioning routine. So it was only a matter of time before the, advanced supplements and, illegal or banned performance enhancers made their way into the boxing culture. And the thing about boxing is it's slow to catch on, but once it does catch on, it makes up for lost time pretty quickly. It catches on fast. And I think that's happening now. I mean, I think, we're eons away from, Fernando Vargas taking some pills from some, weightlifter that he allowed into his camp 10 years ago or 11 years ago before the Oscar De La Hoya fight. I mean, they were huge just from that year to, the kind of performance enhancers that Shane Mosley used in his rematch with De La Hoya. That was just like 1 year later, but there was a significant advance in the type of performance enhancing drugs that were used. And now we're 10 years beyond that point. So, I mean, I have to assume that what's out there and what's available to these athletes and what some of them might be using is far more advanced than whatever it was that Shane Mosley used going into that rematch with De La Hoya. And I mean, I can't keep up with it. I'm trying to learn, learn as I go and learn as much as I can. And I have questions. I mean, I've got questions, particularly about, synthetic testosterone and why so many of these young athletes, like Lamont Peterson and like Mickey Bay, needed to go to a physician, a doctor, a specialist, and have their testosterone levels boosted. I'm wondering what's happening to these young men that they would have abnormally low testosterone when they are still in their 20s, when they're in their late 20s going into their early 30s, when a young healthy adult male shouldn't have these problems. I still don't know. I still haven't heard why that is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's one of those, as far as I've heard it, and the thing is, it kind of makes you seem like you're implicating people no matter what. And I'd like to refrain
by the way,
from
I'm
that.
not implicating Peterson.
Absolutely.
My website had a lot of trouble recently involving Lamont Peterson, and we had to make a retraction, and hopefully that a scenario like that will never happen again with our publication. We're going to be more careful. I don't want to cast doubt on any fighter, and I've taken a pretty strong stance on that regarding Manny Pacquiao. Rumors about Manny Pacquiao, rumors about Mayweather, rumors about Juan Manuel Marquez. There has to be diehard proof. And in the case of Peterson and Bay, they had medical evidence that their testosterone was low, and they had this procedure done. And that boosted their testosterone. But I'm just my question is, and Bay was a little bit better about dealing with it. I mean, maybe he learned from Peterson's situation. He let people know, or at least let his physician know, that he can't receive anything that could be construed as a performance enhancer. But I still think that when athletes have these procedures done, whether it's synthetic testosterone or something else, another type of hormone, synthetic or otherwise, they need to let their promoter know. They need to let the state commission know, and they need to let the management of his opponent know as well. I mean, there needs to be transparency, and people need to be public about their medical procedures in the world of professional sports, and particularly boxing, which always sort of has a high degree of suspicion and cynicism. So I think you have to be extra careful with boxing, because people are just a little bit more paranoid in the boxing world than in the regular world. And I just think, when fighters undergo these type of procedures, we need to know why. What was it? Was it a thyroid condition? Did they have some kind of illness? Were they overtrained? You know what I mean? There's got to be a reason for a young man to need to go and replenish his testosterone supply. That's not out of the ordinary for a man in his 50s. I mean, that's nature. But for a man in his late 20s, there has to be they're saying there's a medical reason, but I'm just saying, what is that medical reason? What is it?
And
these are the kind of questions that are out there, and that to me is the cloud of PEDs, is that it sort of takes the attention off of the fighters and off of the fights and onto, what else are they doing? What else is going on?
Absolutely. Well, and the sad thing is, when you break down into, I've been doing a little bit of reading, one of the things that can deplete your testosterone at a young age is steroid use.
Well, right.
So it's just one of those. So
the question's going to be out there. So when you say, well, yeah, I had low testosterone. I'm 28 years old. I'm 29 or whatever. And I woke up one day and, I had developed breast or something. You know what I mean? I went to the doctor and he gave me a shot. It's like, well, wait a minute. How does that happen?
Yeah. And the sad thing is you almost have to control how good your performance is, because if let me say this, if Ward had beaten Dawson the way he did at 175, which I think he would have. I think too much is
Right.
made of the weight. If he would have
Yeah.
done that at 175, Andre Ward would be implicated as a steroid user 30
That
minutes after the telecast.
that's what sucks. That's what totally
So,
sucks.
but anyway, let me throw
And I
this to
think we're
Kurt.
careful about that too.
Yeah, absolutely. But
Obviously, we got to be.
yeah, let me throw this to Kurt. I know he has a couple of questions for you there too, Doug. Kurt?
Yeah, Doug, I mean, we was just talking about, hype or truth, about, currently active fighters, but I want to talk about a fighter, he's no longer with us, and that's, I know you know him as well, you've interviewed him, that's Edwin Valero. I think
Right.
you first met him in, I think it was 2003 when he came to the States.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Wow, years ago. Time flies. Holy
yeah,
crap.
I think, on the internet and social media, it's like you get polarizing views, you get one side who, believe that he was the truth, and if he was given the bigger fights, he would have, become a star. A bit like how people are looking at Golovkin now. And then
Right.
there's the other side who are like, this guy was a limited brawler. He would have been
Right.
exposed the first time he stepped up. But I know you saw him in camp and up close and personal. What are your opinions on how good he could have been?
I thought he was going to be a star. I thought he was going to be a superstar. I'm not saying that he would have been unbeaten after 40 or 45 pro bouts. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying even in his losses, he would have performed to a level and put on the type of fight where he would have been like a Thomas Hearns, where it didn't matter that he got knocked out in 3 rounds or that, he was stopped late in the fight or whatever, because the fights would have been great. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like Thomas Hearns came up short against Sugar Ray Leonard. He came up short against Marvelous Marvin Hagler. But those were great fights. And he's looked at as a great fighter. And he should be looked at as a great fighter. And he was a tremendous attraction. And he wasn't just a star in boxing. He was a superstar. And that's how I viewed Edwin Valero. And to me, Valero kind of had that God's gift of just knock you out, one punch knockout power, or, real heavy hands, the way Thomas Hearns had. But he had that with this sort of Latino swagger / machismo that Roberto Duran had. And he had kind of what Duran had developed. Actually, Duran even had it when he was in his prime as a lightweight. He just didn't get credit for it because he was such a devastating puncher at lightweight. But he had subtleties to the sport, subtle technique and defensive ability that people didn't credit because he could be such a ferocious fighter. But you saw those subtleties as he got older, as he moved up in weight, particularly as a junior middleweight and as a middleweight. And you see all the nuances and the finer points of boxing that Roberto Duran had an understanding of. And I think, when as the level of competition would have increased for Edwin Valero, because before he took his life, he was just starting to break it out into into viewership on major American television. I mean, his last fight was against Antonio DeMarco, and it was on Showtime, and that was the first time he'd been on American cable. So he was just starting to kind of like show people beyond YouTube clips or just beyond small pay-per-views and all that. But he showed us in that fight that he had some footwork, and before that I'd heard that his feet were always planted, or that his feet were in cement, or that he didn't have any footwork, or that he didn't have any head movement. And I knew that wasn't true from just watching him train, but that was like one of the general perceptions on him. And I think as his competition would have moved up, if he was fighting somebody like Top Rank had plans of matching him with Lamont Peterson. There were talks about him fighting Timothy Bradley. Personally, I think he beats both guys. I think these would have been great fights at 140 pounds. But I see Edwin Valero prevailing in both fights, and I think he would have stopped both guys late. But they would have been tremendous fights. And I think those guys had a level of talent and tenacity that would have forced Edwin to use all of the tools that he had at his disposal, but often didn't use because he didn't have to. If he could go out there and blast a dude, well, guess what? That's what he was going to do. Right. He was going to go for the short night rather than the long night. That was just part of his mentality. He's a puncher, but he could box. His technique wasn't always the sharpest because, he was a hard-headed dude and didn't always listen to his trainers when he had a world-class trainer, and for long stretches of his career, he didn't have a world-class trainer, and in fact, trained himself. So he was always in great condition, but his technique was sometimes sloppy, which didn't mean he didn't know how to box, because boxing, guys, is being able to hit your opponent and putting yourself in a position where they can't hit you back. And he could do that. He could do that just on his talent. He had hand-eye coordination and eye-foot coordination where he could stay out of range. But, his chin was in the air. Sometimes his punches weren't very sharp. Sometimes he would drop his hands a lot. So he didn't have the sharpest technique. You know what? Neither did Muhammad Ali. Neither did Roy Jones Jr. They got away with it because of their level of talent. I think, because of different talents, I think Edwin Valero got away with some sloppy technique for long stretches during his career. But the bottom line for me is, to me, he wasn't hype. He was never hype. He was always the truth. And I totally understand people thinking that, okay, well, he was hype because often he did look sloppy. Sometimes he did get into, exchanges with lesser fighters that he didn't need to get into with. But, when he did that, in his mind, he knew he was going to come out on top because he had more power than most guys. And, he could take a shot too. He was a tough guy. But I think I believe he would have, whoever thought he was hype, had he still been fighting today, I don't think anyone would be calling him hype. Whether he'd be undefeated with all knockouts or not, I don't know. The fight I wanted to see is like the dream fight for me. That to me is the one fight I wanted to see more than any other dream matchup. Is Valero versus Pacquiao at 135 pounds or 140 pounds, and I would have picked Valero in that fight. In all likelihood, Pacquiao would have probably got him. But I'm telling you, it would have been so explosive, no one would have cared about the result. No one would have cared. Both guys would have been elevated. And Pacquiao being who Pacquiao is, he would have fought him again. Pacquiao's not afraid to give a guy a rematch or a third match or a fourth match, no matter how tough the fights are. So to me, Pacquiao would have elevated Edwin Valero. Whether Valero would have won against him in their first fight, Pacquiao would have elevated Valero to not just star status, in my opinion, not so humble opinion in this regard, superstar status.
That would have been a great fight. I think Valero would have won too. I think the thing with Valero for me is I think he was too crazy to hurt. Any sane person that was in Ibeabuchi's shoes against Tua would have been floored multiple times, but he was too crazy to be hurt.
He's crazy. Yeah.
So, keep going, Kurt. I know you got a couple more there.
And I was just going to say, and in his last fight as well, he suffered a terrible cut, and he just brushed it aside and just carried on.
Didn't bother him at all. He felt the initial pain of the elbow, kind of looked to the referee to be like, hey, that was an elbow, right? And they keep fighting. His hair's in his eye, the blood's in his eye, and then the bloody hair is in his eye, and it don't matter. What he did is he kind of made an adjustment to where it was strange because his vision's impaired, but he kind of took the fight more on the outside, and it was kind of more of an in and out attack instead of just staying on top of Antonio DeMarco. And I'm kind of glad it happened because it was another sort of proof that he could handle adversity. And I thought he showed that in his first title fight in 2006 against Vicente Mosquera, who was very underrated, a real monster out of Panama. And he went to Panama to fight him, and it was the first time he had to fight beyond 2 rounds. And it was a championship fight, so he had to go 12. And he was dropped in the 3rd round and picked himself up and just fought like a tiger into the late rounds. I think they went to the 10th round before Mosquera's corner stopped the fight. But to me, that fight answered all the questions that I had about Valero's chin and heart and ability to handle adversity. But I understood that other people had those questions about him. And I was kind of glad that happened in the DeMarco fight because he had to deal with some adversity with the blood, and he kept his composure, and he boxed a little bit. He used his legs, and he showed he had good timing, moving in and out, because he wasn't a tall guy, and he's in against a tall guy. And he was able to get in and hit and not get hit in return. And to me, it was a small victory for folks who had Valero's back. It was like, yeah, I've seen him do this. I know he's got footwork, and he showed that footwork. And it was just a little wrinkle to, what is now just kind of like an urban legend or an urban myth. But it's like, it adds to that what could have been.
Yeah, and another controversial figure is Antonio Margarito, and I remember reading a I think it was an interview on Boxing Scene, and they made. I think they got it from your mailbag where you said you didn't believe that he didn't know what was in his gloves prior to the Mosley fight. I mean, do
Right.
you think that, and why would you think that?
Yeah, I do. I do. And by the way, I totally understand anybody believing that he's been a criminal his whole career and that he's loading his gloves. He's had been loading his gloves his entire career. I had a conversation with Max Kellerman shortly before this past Saturday's show in Las Vegas. And Kellerman expressed that. He said he believes that Margarito was always just sort of an average fighter who was just tough. And he was made into a special fighter because he always loaded his gloves, to which I didn't believe. And I told Max I understood why Max believed that, because Max said, well, once he was busted, he never won a major fight, never looked the same, never scored a knockout. And I understand that. And what I pointed out to Max is, I said, Max, when he won the biggest fight of his career in the summer of 2008, the pinnacle of his career against Miguel Cotto, he took a lot of damage in that fight. And you have to realize that even though he wasn't an old man, Margarito had been a professional boxer for 15 years and absorbing punishment in all of his fights, but also in the gym. The way he trained was the kind of training that burns a fighter out. So it's when you're a fighter with Margarito's style and you're taking as much punishment as Margarito took. I mean, he had a great chin and he stuck it out there. You're going to have a steep decline. And, it wasn't surprising to me that it happened after the Mosley fight. But one thing that I had that Max didn't have is having covered Margarito's career going back to 1996, going back to when he was a nobody, going back to when he wasn't even being trained by Javier Capetillo. I remember Margarito then. I remember covering Margarito's fights for newspapers, against the likes of Rodney Jones, which he lost in Culver City. I was at that fight as media, and when he upset a guy named Alfred Nkama on a forum boxing card. And I told Max he always had damaging punches. Now, he wasn't able to heap a lot of damage on Rodney Jones because Rodney Jones was a tall southpaw boxer who stayed on the outside, kind of like a poor man's Winky Wright. But I said everybody else, and not just in fights, but in training, they got busted up when Margarito put hands on them, even when they had headgear on and the big gloves. And he said, well, he was probably loading up his wraps for the sparring sessions. And I'm saying, well, and I heard that. I heard people make allegations about that, after he was busted in the Mosley fight. One of the guys that he sparred with, during the Mosley camp said, yeah, my eye socket got busted. And I believe his hands were loaded. But here's the thing. If they were doing that, they were doing it in front of everybody. I mean, it's not like they went to a private room to have their hands wrapped before every training session. His hands were wrapped right there in front of everybody. He always had an open camp. He never shut out the public, never shut out the media. You could follow him anywhere in the gym. You could watch, most of the interviews that were done with Margarito going into the Cintron rematch, going in to the Cotto fight, going into the Mosley fight. When you went to visit him at the gym, Top Rank had a publicist there, a guy named Bill Kaplan, he's a publicist with Golden Boy Promotions. But at the time he was with Top Rank. And what Bill Kaplan would do was sit the media, and it'd be a bunch of us. It wouldn't just be one guy. We would surround Margarito and his trainer Capetillo while Margarito's getting his hands wrapped. So I'm thinking, okay, if this dude has been loading his gloves every time he spars and every time he fights, that must make Javier Capetillo the most devious, sneaky, criminal mastermind in the history of boxing to be able to pull the wool over that many commissions, over that many inspectors, over that many people in the gym, sparring partner trainers, media like myself, members of the public. They were able to just like magic slip in some loaded wraps every time this guy trained and every time this guy fought. To me, that sounds ludicrous. I mean, honestly, that to me that's ludicrous. And I'll add a little something else, and which really irks me about the Margarito scandal, and that is I fully support and agree with the California State Athletic Commission's decision to strip Capetillo of his license and to strip Margarito of his boxing license after that incident before the Mosley fight. The rules are very clear. You don't have any kind of you can't even have wet hand wraps. When you're wrapping your hands, there's a certain amount of gauze and wraps that are allowed for a boxer's hands going into a professional fight. But everyone writes that he had hand wraps dipped in plaster, and that's not the truth. Most of these people saying this have never actually seen the evidence, never seen the wraps. They were some old, wet, bloody wraps, and they didn't have plaster on them. If you read the report, or if you covered the commission hearing, there were traces of substances that could be used in plaster. And it could be like chalk and water. You know what I'm saying? And if you talk to commission, and I've talked to some guys on the commission who used to be with the commission who are no longer with the commission, and I asked them, well, how much of these traces were on the confiscated wraps? And he said, like a pinch of salt. So that's the truth. But what's written out there is that he had like he had pieces of plaster in his wraps or in his gloves, or his wraps were like dipped in plaster of Paris, and that's just not true. And I'm not saying that we should look at Margarito as a sympathetic figure, because the sad truth is Margarito made out very well following this scandal. For starters, he had Bob Arum, who kind of made it his personal mission to get him recommissioned somewhere in the United States and to get him a huge fight. But I'm going to say the boxing media, my peers among boxing writers who grandstanded so much and got on their soapbox and vilified Margarito, I will say that they did something that the great Hall of Fame promoter Bob Arum could not do, and that was they made him a viable, marketable B-side for a pay-per-view star like Manny Pacquiao, or for a pay-per-view star like Miguel Cotto. They made him a villain. They gave him a black hat and made him interesting for the first time for HBL's 24/7. For the first time among casual fans, you could recognize this guy, because he never got any recognition when he was just an honest welterweight title holder who was willing to fight all of the top 10 contenders of his division. He was that one guy who would fight a Paul Williams or an undefeated Kermit Cintron or a once-beaten Joshua Clottey. He didn't get any notice, and he wasn't selling tickets, and he didn't do great ratings. But after being made into the villain, into the bad guy, suddenly he's a pay-per-view B-side, and he made a lot of money with the Pacquiao fight and a substantial amount of money with the Miguel Cotto rematch, and enough for him to retire comfortably. And I got to say, he has all those people who vilified him in the media, he has them to thank for that. And he's aware of it. You know what I'm saying? So for all those folks who crapped on him and vilified him and all you did was make him more marketable. And Robert K. Arum took advantage of it. And this villain, this guy who you guys said belongs in jail, he benefited financially because of that.
Yeah, a lot of people tuned in to just to see Pacquiao take him out. It's just like, let's just watch Pacquiao.
Guess what? He got a piece of that pay-per-view upside. Guess what? He got a piece. He didn't just get paid a flat fee. He got paid 7 figures plus a piece of that pay-per-view upside, and it was substantial.
Oh, he went laughing all the way to the bank, and they perfectly cast Margarito, though, and this whole incident fit into that persona well. I remember the first time that I knew Margarito was just like this big, mean man was before the Cintron rematch, and he was like mocking Cintron with the crying stuff. And it's just like, man, this guy's just pure evil. He's just out there to kick people's asses.
Not a nice guy. No, he's a
bully.
Tijuana. He's a dude. He's a dude who, you got to be a rough dude if you're going to choose boxing as your profession when you're 16 years old. That you got to be hard, and that's a hard environment that he came from.
It's like the Eddie Guerrero of boxing, man.
What was that?
It's like the Eddie Guerrero of boxing. I don't know if you ever watched wrestling back in the day, but that just came to me.
It's not bad. Yeah.
So, Let me ask you this real quick here, and then give a couple more questions over to Kurt. Who do you think is a prospect right now that's flying under the radar and is going to make a splash. Maybe not like a huge splash, but in the manner of the way Austin Trout and some people said, you don't know what Cotto's getting into with this guy.
Right, right.
Who do you think has that going for them right now that's just going to totally just come in and upend somebody out of the blue?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. I don't know. I'll be honest. I'm hit and miss on these under the radar guys. Sometimes they turn out to be an Edwin Valero or a Gennady Golovkin, and then other times they turn out to be Ismail Salak. You know what I mean? Where you see a dude who's just, kicking everyone's ass in the gym. You know what I mean? And has the amateur background and has the talent, and it. For whatever, for one reason or another, with Salak, it was his chin, just doesn't pan out. And I'm not closing the book on Salak, by the way. I still think it can be a tremendous light heavyweight. And the guy who beat him, Grachev, has gone on to do quite well. So, that makes that loss look a little bit better. But the bottom line is, Salak is back to being under the radar. I don't know. Gosh, that's I can't think of anybody right now. I don't know, Kurt, if there's any young prospects out there that, the guys that I'm really excited about as prospects right now, they're not under the radar. I think it's harder to be under the radar these days with the internet and social media and, hardcore fight fans always out on the lookout for the next guy. But there's a guy, Jesse Magdaleno, who I like a lot. I think he's a tremendous prospect. I believe junior featherweight. A lot of young talent at junior featherweight. Come to think of it.
A guy if he's so criminally inactive, I thought Brad Solomon might have turned into something, but he just doesn't fight.
Yeah, well, he's not. You can't even consider him a prospect anymore. He's kind of like a fringe contender with a lot of talent. Who's I guess has had managerial / promotional problems that have kept him out of the ring, which is just too bad. But I got to be honest, I'm kind of coming up with a blank with that next guy or whatever. Had you guys interviewed me a year and a half ago, I would have said Golovkin. But I'm trying to think of somebody right now who's got like a real strong buzz. In the gyms and everything right now. And
it's tough with the internet, because so many people get to see this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
But kind of moving in with that, who do you think of the last 20 years was the most underrated fighter that just does not get their due, considering what they had going for them as far as talent and even accomplishment?
Well, there's a lot of guys who, just came around in the wrong time, wrong place in the last 20 years that, had they been in a different weight class or come around a few years later, they would have won a title or maybe even 2 titles. I think about Obakar a lot and who he had to fight when he got his shot at the welterweight title. He had to fight an undefeated Felix Trinidad, an undefeated Ike Corte, and an undefeated Oscar De La Hoya. And he gave his all in all 3 of those fights, and he had his moments in all 3 of those fights. And unfortunately, he goes down in history as an also-ran. But he was a tremendous prospect who we used to watch on USA's Tuesday Night Fights. And he was a solid top 10 contender for many years, and just was never able to grab that major title because of the era, the fact of the matter is that, he came around in the 90s, and the guys who held welterweight belts at that time were not just undefeated bigger guys, but they were tremendous talents,
I think Corte's underrated. You brought him up.
Corte is underrated. Ain't no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Corte, what I love about Corte is he was that one welterweight title holder who dared to fight the welterweight title holder who people didn't even want to mention his name, out of Durango, Mexico, Jose Luis Lopez. You guys remember him? He fought Corte and it was a draw. Corte basically outboxed him just with his jab, slammed him with his jab, probably won 8 out of the 12 rounds, but Corte got dropped twice and hurt really bad by this dude. You guys still remember Jose Luis Lopez?
It's just not ringing a bell right now.
Amazing. Okay, look him up on BoxRec. WBO welterweight title holder from Durango, Mexico, where
Whoa.
Oscar De La Hoya's father is from. And legend has it, De La Hoya's father said, "I will not let you fight this dude. He's too dangerous." Yeah, the dude had amazing talent. He just never had the hunger and dedication to the sport. He's one of these dudes, one of these rare boxing guys who grew up middle class, maybe even a little bit upper middle class, and had other interests. He liked to surf, liked to cycle, bit of a hippie. You know, he smoked weed and stuff. But he had a chin of iron. He could walk through the biggest punches anybody could throw, and he was a tremendous puncher, particularly with his left hook. Took out some Irish dude, popular Irish dude, to win the WBO belt, which was kind of lightly regarded at the time because this is like mid-'90s, you know. And he fought Ike Corte and held Corte to a draw because he dropped Corte twice and hurt him at least once. And he had an amazing fight with James Page. He fought James Page for the WBA welterweight title. That was on Showtime. And I think this is still late 90s, maybe 98 or something, 99. And what a fight that was. And he had, man, Page won the fight because Page just gutted it out and outworked him. But he had Page down. He had Page badly hurt in that fight a couple of times. But look him up. He doesn't get any props. Obviously, you guys are like, who the hell is this?
Yeah, no kidding. There you go.
There's a dude. I'm telling you, man, that dude, if he would have had the dedication and maybe if he would have had like the right trainer, you know, behind him or the right promotional situation, man, that guy was a beast, man. Lopez, he was a beast.
I'm gonna have to check.
He was like the first guy to make Yuri Boy Compass just quit, just turn his head and quit in the ring. Like, oh no, you know. I mean, Felix Trinidad was the first guy to beat Compass and bust him up, but Lopez was the first dude to make Compass just say, no mas, nah, dude, never mind.
You got to be a bad man for a guy that's still fighting, you know, 15 plus years later with, you know, 100 victories at this point in time to make him just quit.
Yeah, and this was still when Compass was still, you know, somewhat in his prime and was still a puncher.
Now, who do you think was the most overrated of the last 20 years on the flip side of that coin?
Wow, overrated.
Arturo Gatti for me.
What was that?
Arturo Gatti for me, actually. As much as fun as he was, the talent level just wasn't what a lot of his fans would like to say.
To me, I mean, I can't underrate his ability to excite a crowd and to draw fans. I mean, he was practically a sports franchise in Atlantic City, and that can't be understated. But he was overrated to a point where he was a first ballot Hall of Famer, and I think that's where he's overrated because there have been other fighters who were very popular, did great ratings, sold tickets, and you know, they brought just as much blood and guts as Arturo Gatti did every time they fought, but they don't get the kind of credit that Arturo Gatti got. You know what I mean?
Naz deserves to be in the Hall before Gatti does.
I agree. Yeah, he was a better talent. And he accomplished more. And, you know, he beat better guys. I mean, yeah, to me, Naz gets a check mark from me. I don't know why people are hating on him, but maybe it was just his personality or whatever. But one thing, you know, having come around, you know, at a time when Naz was still on top and covering some of his fights, Hamed was a cool cat, you know, when he was away from the cameras. You know, he kind of had a boxing persona, and then he was himself. And he was actually amazingly humble for a guy with the level of fame that he had. He had fame on multiple continents, and he was making a lot of money. That dude was making incredible record-making money for a featherweight, or, you know, even fighter, you know, sub-welterweight fighters. He was making record amounts of money, and he was pretty down to earth. He was a pretty cool cat.
That's cool to hear. And I have one more question for you, and then I'll turn it over to Kurt for the last questions before we have to go here. And it's just, you know, obviously because of your position with the ring. Do you think that boxing fans blow the relationship between Golden Boy and the ring out of proportion?
Hell yes. Yeah, they totally do. I can't. It's like people who want to call Edwin Valero hype or Gennady Golovkin hype. It's their opinion, and I can see where they're coming from. I can understand why they say what they say, because the bottom line is Golden Boy Promotions owns the Ring magazine. They own the Ring brand. They own the website ringtv.com. So, I mean, I can understand that. But, I mean, when I look at our ratings and when I look at the content on our website, we cover everybody. We don't favor anybody. I mean, if we're going into a top-ranked show, believe me, there's going to be a lot of stories on that top-ranked show. I don't like boycott Top Rank. You know what I'm saying? I mean,
so you didn't cancel it. You didn't cancel your HBO subscription.
No, why would I do that? You know? I mean, they got great fights coming up, and Showtime has great fights coming up. And I think people, I mean, you know, and they do it. What I don't like is when people just say, you know, that, you know, the ring is just a tool of Golden Boy or whatever, and they don't back it up. I mean, can you give me something? Can you tell me why? And like, I'll ask people. I'll get into Twitter battles with some of these folks, and they'll just have like one beat. They'll be like, well, you guys dropped Josecito Lopez from the welterweight rankings, and Victor Ortiz is still up there. So that's gold. Like, that's one. Okay, I agree with them. That's a bad call, and that's one that will. I mean, that we're going to rectify it. I mean, the thing is, the way our rankings are done, it's by committee. We have a big panel. They're all opinionated, and they have different opinions, like most boxing people. They really do. And there's nobody whose opinion is greater than the other. It's not like my opinion's better than Marty Mulcahy's, who's on the panel. You know, if I will say one guy has the most pull, has the most influence in the ring ratings panel, I'd say it's Anson Wainwright. And the reason I say that is because Anson is always the first guy to give his opinions on every division. Anson watches all boxing. He knows all of the results. He's a crazy boxing nut who, I mean, he is intimately familiar with like the 12th best, flyweight from Thailand or South Africa. You know what I mean? He has this great international knowledge and passion for the sport, and he's the first guy to weigh in. And he goes from the heavyweight division all the way down to the strawweight division and gives his opinions on fights that happened the previous week, and everyone piggybacks off of him. So in a way, he kind of leads things. You know what I mean? Like, he'll kind of set the tone on how we're going to rank. And I'm not saying that he's responsible for Josecito Lopez dropping out of the rankings, by the way. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying if there's anybody who has any influence, it's I think people have this bizarre fantasy that Oscar De La Hoya is on the panel and that he's calling us, or that Richard Schaefer is calling us, and that doesn't happen. They got better things to do. They're not involved in the rankings process. They don't tell us what to write. No one has ever told me what fight to cover or who to write about. So, it pisses me off when people say that, because to me they're lying and they're not backing it up, and that pisses me off. But at the same time, I understand that fight fans are a little bit nutty, that sports fans in general are very passionate and very extreme, and they have they have very absolute pictures of the world. So it's like there's right and there's wrong, and unfortunately for a lot of Golden Boy people, for a lot of hardcore fight fans, anything Golden Boy related is just wrong. They just want to hate on Golden Boy. And I understand it. I mean, Golden Boy is like the 800-pound gorilla, just like Don King was in the 90s. In the 90s, Don King was the man in boxing. I mean, he had most of the talent. He had an exclusive relationship with Showtime. He did. I mean, he put on all the huge pay-per-views, and anything bad that happened in boxing, it was Don King's fault. And nobody said, reporters didn't say anything good about Don King, and fight fans didn't say anything good about Don King. And I guess in a way it just kind of comes with the territory, and the fact that, Golden Boy Promotions does own the Ring brand. We're going to get some of that hate. We're going to get some of that. And I got to accept it. I need to stop arguing with people on Twitter. Because it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't go. I asked from Missouri, so I'm like, show me. And sometimes, I mean, it's good in some ways. I mean, people can grow and relationships can be formed. Because, I mean, I didn't really know Mark Ortega. And, he was just, he was one day, this months ago, he's firing shots out at the Ring. He's like, the whole rankings is just to crown, champions, who were popular American fighters, whether it's Golden Boy or Top Rank, all the guys who are going to hold Ring titles are going to be Golden Boy or Top Rank fighters. And I'm like, show me those matchups then, tell me potentially in every weight class, because I'm looking at heavyweight on down to super middleweight, and I don't see any Golden Boy or Top Rank guys, And I was like, and I'm looking under junior welterweight or lightweight, and I don't see any top ranker Golden Boy guys. Like, well, you know what I mean. The marquee divisions, and I'm like, well, show me, tell me what you think is going to happen. And he's kind of like, and he finally, we're going back and forth on Twitter, and he's finally like, well, I don't know how you guys figure out this stuff. I don't understand how you guys come to your rankings. And I'm like, what? You follow boxing. You say you know boxing. You love boxing. You've been following it your whole life. You follow everything. Why don't you join the panel? And most guys tell me to go F myself. And Mark said, okay.
There you go.
So he did. And you know what? He's a productive member of the panel, and he's writing stories for ringtv.com. And to me that was something positive that came out of a little spat. And I try to keep it civil, by the way, with the whole Twitter thing. But I mean, 9 out of 10 times, the Twitter argument, it just goes around in circles.
Absolutely.
They don't stand. They just wanted to shoot some. They just wanted to spew a little venom. And I shouldn't have spat back, or I shouldn't have let the venom hit me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and it's the same way on boxing forums. We have the same arguments over and over again. I'll defend the ring for a second here, just for given someone a non-biased opinion for anyone listening to the interview here, if they consider you biased, although I wouldn't, especially after a conversation here. In defense, if you look at the 126 ring title, what happened there, even though I don't agree with the 1 versus 3, you had Mikey Garcia, Orlando Salido, neither one of them Golden Boy fighters, and they went out of their way to make that for the lineal title. That within itself.
By the way, the panel was not 100% in agreement for that. The majority was.
Chris John doesn't fight anyone. What are you going to do?
Pissed off that Chris John was skipped over.
He doesn't fight anyone. What can you do?
Yeah, and I had always felt that Chris John was still arguably the best featherweight, but more people on the panel and the editorial board felt otherwise. They felt that he was winding his career down and was taking soft spots and was never going to fight a significant fight again. And that's their opinion. And that's the thing about rankings. It's a lot of opinions, I wasn't against the ring title being up for grabs with Mikey Garcia and Orlando Salido. But I could understand an argument against it, which a few members of the panel had, and it was a long discussion. In fact, I think I wrote up the ring ratings review on that particular matter, and I actually included a lot of the discussion in the ring ratings update that was published, on ringtv.com for everybody to see, because I want to have transparency, and I think it has helped a little bit, but I think there's still just those folks out there that they want to have something to deride and chide, and we're kind of an easy target.
Yeah.
We are.
Let me send this over to Kurt for one last question here. Yeah, Kurt.
Yeah, well, actually, my question was going to be about the rankings. I mean, the criticism that I see is not actually with the divisional rankings. It's actually with the pound for pound list, and that's where I think a lot of the criticism with Golden Boy and Ring, with like Adrian Broner and Robert Guerrero. But
right.
I know
I hated Broner being there, and I was open with it. I didn't agree with Chuck. The problem with that was we had this panel, and nobody ever weighed in on pound for pound rankings. No one ever did. Occasionally, a pound for pound rated guy would fight, and somebody would mention it, like Marty would, and Marty's only comment would be, "Yeah, so and so fought. They're pound for pound. I have no opinion on this. I can't wrap my mind around a mythical rankings. I can't wrap my mind around this is what he would write, a rating system that actually has no criteria, So he's like, so I have nothing to say. And then you'd have a bunch of guys, and I was one of them. I would reply, ditto, same here, so, whatever, mental masturbation, whatever. We'd do that, and there was a few guys, like Mike Coppinger. He would like, I think so-and-so should be ranked in the pound for pound or whatever. But most of us didn't. So it was kind of like Chuck Giampa's decision kind of got out there unchecked. And I didn't agree with it. And I was totally public with it. I did not agree with it. I don't think Broner should be top 10 pound for pound. But having said that, I think a lot of people do think he's pound for pound. Whether they rank him in their pound for pound or not, I think people believe he's pound for pound, because when people talk about who he should fight, people they don't think he has any challenges in the 135 pound division. And when you ask them who's going to beat him at 140, they're like, well, I think so-and-so can give him a good fight, but I think Broner will win. And when he says he's going to go up to welterweight and fight a top 10 contender at welterweight in Malignaggi, who holds a belt, nobody believes Malignaggi has a shot. Nobody's giving Malignaggi a chance against this guy, which tells me people have a very high opinion of Adrian Broner. And for some people, that's what pound for pound means. For Chuck Giampa, that's what pound for pound means. You can't beat this guy. Nobody in his weight class can beat him, and nobody around his weight class is going to beat him because his talent is that obvious. That's how Chuck looks at the pound for pound. And to a lesser extent, that's how Michael Rosenthal views the pound for pound. I'm not. With pound for pound, I'm totally about what you accomplished. There's benchmarks. There's accomplishment. You got to like conquer your division and then move on to another division. You don't just win a title. You unify titles. You do stuff like Nonito Donaire has done. You know what I'm saying? You do something like that, or you do something like Andre Ward or Sergio Martinez, and you take on the best fighters of your division, and you say, "I'm king of the mountain." You know what I mean? Like that. You know, that to me is pound for pound. But other people don't look at it that way. They look at it like, well, pound for pound means you rate them against the elite fighters against themselves, and you pretend if weight wasn't a factor, who would win? Well, I don't see anyone beating Adrian Broner. I don't see anyone beating Floyd Mayweather because no one can touch him. He's unbeatable. So he's pound for pound, you know. And you get into these arguments, which, by the way, they never end. There's never a conclusion to them. But like I say, I totally understand people's criticism. With Adrian Broner is a Golden Boy Promotions, Al Heyman managed fighter. He's very talented. But has he proven to be an elite fighter? He's proven to be an elite talent, but has he proven to be a pound for pound guy like Andre Ward or Nonito Donaire have? I don't think so, but other people disagree with me.
I want to sneak this in before we close out because his name keeps coming up here, and I have an opinion on this guy, and curious if yours is matching or if you're going to disagree with me. But I argue that I believe that the best Nonito Donaire is better than the best version of Manny Pacquiao. What would you think on that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think he's not as formidable of an offensive fighter as the best version of Manny Pacquiao, but he's a more natural talent. He's a more fluid boxer. His athleticism is on par. He doesn't have the explosive power of a Pacquiao, a prime Pacquiao, mind you, but he can do more. He's a more versatile boxer. He can be a striker. He's a terrific counterpuncher. He has the kind of talent where his peripheral vision is like omnipresent. I mean, he sees everything, and when he strikes, he generally gets results. And I agree with that. As a matter of fact, and this is another thing that Kellerman and I talked about is he's arguably the best fighter pound for pound.
I agree.
I think he can make that, and has been for a number of years. And he's not just showing that super talent like Broner's showing, but he's beating the level of opposition and dominating a world-class level of opposition on a consistent basis over years in different weight classes, which is something that Broner hasn't done yet. I'm not saying Broner won't. He might. Yeah. Probably will. Well, but he hasn't yet.
It's the subtleties with Donaire that I think people miss. Everyone's like, oh, wow, that knockout of Arce was amazing, but we all expected that. They didn't pick up how he did that. Arce moved in a half-second period. Moved his gloves 3 inches further out away from his face, and Donaire's left hand was there as soon as it happened.
Yeah. I tell you what, I know Guillermo Rigondeaux was an all-time great amateur. I know he's advanced very quickly in the pro ranks, and he is a tremendous counterpuncher, boxer, good puncher. He's got Kool-Aid for blood. But I think he's going to be in a world of crap against Donaire. I think it's going to be tough for him to draw a bead on Donaire. And once Donaire figures out, finds a flaw or finds an opening, and once he strikes, I think he's going to end that fight rather quickly.
Well, yeah, I mean, if Marroquin's left hook off Guillermo Rigondeaux's temple
Okay.
can stagger him like that, the
Yeah,
hook of Donaire, it seems obvious to me, but
I think it's
we'll
game
find
over. I
out.
think yeah, we will find out. We will absolutely. It's a fight I'm looking forward to watching.
Absolutely. But
Great fight.
Doug, thank you so much for joining us today. You can check out his work in Ring Magazine and also at ringtv.com. Also, Doug, for anyone that doesn't already know, what's your Twitter handle?
It's just Dougie Fischer, at Dougie Fischer, DougieFischer.
Fantastic. And do you have any parting words for our listeners before we go here?
Thank you for your patience. I am a very long-winded guy, and this has been a at least 2 hour plus interview. So if I've bored you at any point, I apologize.
Doug, we've learned a lot from you, and it was an absolute pleasure, and I really hope that we can do it again sometime.
Absolutely, guys. Anytime.
Cool. Fantastic. So, like we said, go check out Doug Fischer's work there at ringtv.com and also in the printed version of Ring Magazine, one of the few printed boxing magazines still available. As always, thank you for Kurt Ward for being here, our producer. And come join us at boxingasylum.com and follow Doug on Twitter. We'll see you guys again on Sunday for another podcast. Thank you very much.